Okay, hello and welcome to the third annual Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center Biodiversity Lecture. I'm Alison Perigo and I'm the director of the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center, or GGBC.
And I'm Marie Källersjö and I'm chairman of the GGBC board.
We are, of course, online today. Which is something that we're all used to at this point, but please bear with us. There may be some technical difficulties along the way. One of the talks has been pre-recorded for this reason, and we've also noticed that there's already been some suspicious activity on the event page with some links. So please don't click those links. This is streamed on our GGBC page, and you shouldn't have to go any further than that. With that, we're excited today that we have two speakers with us who will each speak for about half of the hour that we have. We'll begin with an introduction to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, also called IPBES. And then we will learn a little bit more about the landmark 2019 Global Assessment, and then take a look forward. After the talk, we will be taking questions. So we'll aim to finish by 4 p.m. Swedish time. During the talk, if you have any questions, please put them in the stream under this stream, and we will look at them and take a few at the end. If you would like to sign with your name and affiliation, please do so. Otherwise, we will read them out with your first name only.
Okay, let me say something short about the GGBC. We are a center of collaboration for biodiversity. We are hosted by the Department of Biology and Environmental Sciences at the Gothenburg University. And we have today 14 partners who represent research, outreach, scientific collections, and conservation. And today we are very excited that biodiversity is getting more and more attention. And the goal of the GGBC is to actually make people take action to reduce the loss of biodiversity. And the way we want to do that, our strategy, is to combine science and outreach in a way that will not only engage people, but also make them feel empowered that we can actually succeed in doing the necessary changes to achieve the transformation we need to have a sustainable future. I would like to thank our funders, especially the BEC, the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in a Changing Climate, who are supporting this specific event and other things, and also to our ongoing funders that are the Faculty of Science at the Gothenburg University, the region Västra Götaland, and of course our partners.
And this year, the GGBC has teamed up with the Win-Win Award, which is the world's leading sustainability award based in Gothenburg, but aiming to recognize and support initiatives for outstanding contributions from around the world. This year, their theme is biodiversity. I can also say that this event is part of the Hållbarhetsfestivalen. And if you check out their Facebook page, you will find a number of other events this week around biodiversity, including some from the GGBC and our partners. So today we're very happy to have with us representatives from IPBES, who is the winner of the Win-Win Award this year. IPBES is the world's first and only intergovernmental platform on biodiversity, and it brings people together alongside stakeholders and decision makers from all regions of the world. Together, they're laying the groundwork for a new biodiversity-compatible agenda. For IPBES's barrier-breaking and scientifically credible work, they have been awarded with the world's leading sustainability award, the Win-Win Award this year. Today, to represent IPBES, we have Dr. Larigauderie, the IPBES Executive Secretary, and Professor Sandra Diaz, the co-chair of the Global Assessment. They are just two among a very long list of people who have been involved in IPBES over the years up and still ongoing today. But they are two of the key leadership positions, of course. So first, I would like to introduce Larigauderie, who is the Executive Secretary of IPBES, as I said. However, this is far from Anne's only leadership position in an international science organization. She was previously the head of science and society at the International Council for Science, as well as the executive director for Diversitas. She's also an accomplished researcher from the beginning, having worked in several projects in plant ecology and adaptation. So with that, I would like to hand it over to you, Anne, for your talk on IPBES.
Thank you very much, Alison, and greetings to all of you in Sweden and around the world. It really is a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon about IPBES and about biodiversity. So when we talk about biodiversity, we really talk about all life on Earth. We talk about genetic diversity, which is about diversity of individuals within a species. We talk about species diversity, all of the diversity of species of plants and animals. We also talk about ecosystem diversity, from Arctic ecosystems to deserts to tropical forests, and we include human beings into nature and into biodiversity, of course. So back in the 90s, and to give you a little bit of a historical perspective on how IPBES was established, scientists around the world alerted that there was a problem with a loss of biodiversity. There were species threatened with extinctions. There were sizes of populations locally that were shrinking, and that led governments to establish in 1992 a convention dedicated to biodiversity with 3 goals, as you see here: conservation, sustainable use, and sharing in a fair and equitable way the benefits arising from this biodiversity. So shortly after that, and for a rather long period, governments and scientists then agreed that there was no mechanism in between science and policy that would be able to summarize knowledge about biodiversity, to synthesize it, and to provide it to policymakers in a way that they could use, in a way that would be policy relevant. And they also further observed that climate change did have such a mechanism called IPCC, for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that this IPCC had really been instrumental in bringing the issue of climate change on top of the global agenda. And it had also been instrumental in actually establishing global warming as a major issue based on science. And so that really started a long process of consultations, and I was at the time part of the scientific community, which authored a number of papers really asking for such a mechanism, because scientists really wanted their science to play a more important role in informing decision making. So in 2005, 2 major developments took place. First, the release of a large report called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was the first time that ecosystems were analyzed at that level in such an in-depth manner. So it was a landmark report. And in parallel to that, there was a major conference hosted by the President of France, which in the end called for an IPCC-like mechanism for biodiversity. That really gave a big boost for the idea, a lot of momentum. And finally, 20 years after the establishment of the Biodiversity Convention, came in Panama in 2012, the birth of IPBES as the science policy mechanism for biodiversity at the interface between science and policy. So what is IPBES? And so you all know that IPBES stands for Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and our objective is to strengthen knowledge foundations for better policy through science. So the idea is really to better inform decision-making thanks to policy-relevant science. It is an independent mechanism. It has its own decision-making, which is the plenary, which you see meeting here on the upper slide. It currently has 137 governments as members, and we really always work on bringing in additional members. We aim at having universal membership for IPBES of all governments, and the secretariat is hosted by UNEP. It's based in Germany, and I started in 2014 and became the first executive secretary of IPBES, moving from science into this new world for me of science policy. So IPBES has been very busy in the first 5 years or so of its existence, and we say that it has established the knowledge base for decision making. And by that, we mean that IPBES has produced already 8 reports. You see their covers here, starting in 2016 with a report on pollinators and the impact on food production, and ending for this first phase of IPBES in 2019 with a global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services, of which we will hear about after I'm done speaking by one of the co-chairs, Professor Sandra Diaz. So these reports have together assessed and analyzed many thousands of scientific publications. They typically are made of 2 main components. One part, which is the chapters, thousands, well, hundreds and sometimes thousands of pages. It's a very scientific information. It's really the basis, the substance of the report. And then drawn from that, there is a much shorter, typically 15 pages or so document called the Summary for Policymakers, which is for decision makers who do not have time to go into the details of the report, but with a lot of systematic cross-referencing between the key messages in the Summary for Policymakers and the substantiating science in the chapters. So just an example of that, this is, for example, extracted from the Pollination Assessment. And so you see here some of the key messages in the Summary for Policymakers. And what's important to note here is that in each one of its reports, IPBES always proposes options for action. So you see here at the bottom of this slide, different ways to bring back pollinators, in particular in agricultural landscapes. So as you have seen, and as I will illustrate in a few minutes, the reports of IPBES are increasingly taken note of and listened to. And that is because one of the key reasons is that IPBES has established a number of rules and procedures that warrant its legitimacy and its scientific credibility. So I have listed some of those here to give you a sense of what that means. So first of all, IPBES draws its legitimacy from requests directly from government. So all of the reports that IPBES prepares responds to demands, to requests that are made by governments, sometimes directly by governments, but sometimes also through conventions, which is sometimes more powerful because it really represents the views of many governments. So for example, a request from the Convention on Biological Diversity represents a request from 194 governments, which is an extremely powerful request. Another important component is that governments are part of that process. So at various times during the life of the production of an assessment, they are called upon to make comments. And at the end, they are invited to approve the summary for policymakers word by word. They can ask questions to scientists who have produced the report. And at the end of this process, they are co-owners of those reports, which are science and policy reports. In terms of all of the mechanisms that provide scientific credibility, well, first of all, authors are selected based on their excellence, on their CV, but we also try to select groups that represent people from all regions of the world. We do not try, we actually do that, and also that are balanced from a gender point of view, so as to represent the broadest possible range of views on each set of groups that produces the report. We have cycles of peer review where the community out there is invited to reflect on what is there, to criticize, to provide comments, so that after that, those reports benefit and improve. And all of the key messages that are in the summary for policymakers come with a confidence term. So that which itself relies on the quantity of information that is available and on the level of agreement between experts on that information. So for example, if there is a lot of information that is convergent, we say that a statement is well established. So what's important also to realize with IPBES is that it's a community-wide effort, and perhaps that's one of the things that I'm the most proud of, to really have been able, not alone, but of course to have been able to spearhead the assembling of a very large community of like-minded people who all have a very crucial role to play. That includes, of course, the governments, but also all of the scientists, also other knowledge holders, in particular indigenous people and local communities, the wider scientific community, which in every institutions, university, produces scientific publications, which are the basis for the work of IPBES, and all of the colleagues out there who do not work directly on the report, but who are invited to comment. So it's really literally thousands of people who are all on board of IPBES. And IPBES is also increasingly known because it has innovated in a number of ways. And I'll just flag three of those. The first one is with its first product, and that was the Conceptual Framework. It's being featured here on this slide, and Sandra Diaz was the leader of that effort. A conceptual framework is a graphic like this that represent with boxes and arrows the way that people see interactions between nature and humans. And IPBES sees the world like this set of boxes and arrows. And what's important with this framework here is that it really promotes a really integrative approach to biodiversity. And what I mean by this is the following. If you take, for example, the case of pollination, IPBES is going, of course, to look at pollinators, at how they are being lost around the world, but it also is going to look at the causes, which on the framework is called direct drivers. It is then going to look at the institutions, at the governance, which IPBES called indirect drivers. It is going to look at the consequences of this loss for nature's contributions to people and also for the quality of life of people on this planet. So it's going to really look at the full spectrum, taking a very integrated way, and not only just at a few boxes or at a few arrows. And that's really very important. Another important aspect, as I just mentioned, is that IPBES works with indigenous and local knowledge. There is a very thorough approach that has been approved by governments, which was implemented for the first time fully when the global assessment was produced and which has really enriched the conclusions of the global assessment. Another innovation is that we bring in early career scientists. IPBES provides fellowships so that we build the next generation of scientists who are going to really be active at the interface between science and policy. And that also adds a really nice dimension to our work. So now, in terms of how the reports are used, in terms of our impact, and to start wrapping up, I'd like to give you some highlights of that. So I first start with the pollination assessment, and that report was our first report. It really is a great topic. It speaks to everyone around the world. It has an economic impact. It is a global issue. It has an important cultural impact as well. So it's really a nice topic. And some of the impacts included the UN declaring that from now on, and based on the report, there would be a World Bee Day. It's symbolic, but it is very important also in terms of education. The Biodiversity Convention also adopted the specific decision with implications for its work on pollination, and the Food and Agricultural Organization now has a new international initiative on pollination, which is in preparation, which is based on the report. There is also countless of national strategies that have been published on protecting pollinators based on the report and triggered by the report. There are also many initiatives at different levels. This is, for example, a very technical report that was published in France on how to exploit roadsides and other green corridors, for example, underneath electric power corridors, which are now used to promote pollinators. And this is a technical manual on how to do that based on the global assessment. And at the bottom, it's a luxury brand of perfume that also has bee schools on educating children about pollination. But there were really thousands of such initiatives. The global assessment now has had really an enormous impact at the global level on the awareness regarding biodiversity. I have listed here 10 examples. I'll just highlight a couple. The G7 came up with a biodiversity charter. It was for the first time talking about biodiversity, and I had the privilege to present together with, at the time, Chair Bob Watson to the G7 ministers last year. Of course, the global assessment is the scientific basis for this extremely important conversation about the post-2020 framework for biodiversity, which will be approved by the COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity. But there are many new actors that are now coming to biodiversity, such as the private sector. The World Economic Forum in Davos this past January, for example, included for the first time in its global risk report biodiversity as one of the 5 top risks for business. And that was based on the global assessment, which is widely cited in that WEF report released in Davos. The Swiss reinsurance companies, which insures insurance companies, so it is a huge company, is just publishing this past couple of weeks an important report on a business case for biodiversity, also citing the global assessment. There is almost not a single day that passes by without a landmark report from a new actor mentioning the global assessment and towards biodiversity sectors that those actors had not yet been considering before. I just share some of the media covers that appeared after the global assessment was released last year. I came to Sweden to present a few weeks after the release of the report, and I know that it also had a great impact and that the media in Sweden also spoke a lot about it. That's another set of covers, this time in Latin America. Lots of tweeting also, particularly from people who until now had really mostly focused their attention on climate change. Greta Thunberg, I have to mention her, especially since this is here a Swedish-based event, but many others, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, and the Pope himself, and also now being increasingly heard talking about species extinction and biodiversity. So there is a lot next that is on our plate for IPBES, but just flagging a few reports that we are doing in a few weeks. Very shortly, we will be releasing a workshop report on biodiversity and pandemics, the origin in nature of emerging diseases and of pandemics. And a bit later this year, we will be working on another workshop report on the important linkages between biodiversity and climate change. Then moving forward, we're really going to focus on one hand on these important linkages, on how really to achieve simultaneously our development goals that are related to food, to health, to water, to climate, and to biodiversity. We really need to learn how to do that together. And we will also be thinking about what transformative change is, what is needed, and what that really means concretely. So, and that is my last slide, and Sandra Diaz will be talking more about that. But in conclusion, I really want to emphasize
Hi, Anne. This is Alison here. I think we've just lost the sound on you.
She can't hear you.
You should be able to hear me. And can you hear us? Because we can't hear you here.
She can hear
Okay,
us.
we can't hear you. Unfortunately, it seems like might have had to cut you off right there, right as you're finishing up. No, well, so it is. Luckily, that was right in the last minutes, and hopefully we can get you back here in a moment when we have questions after Sandra's talk and let you say your last words then.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, for this very interesting introduction. And to all the listeners, we're sorry it got a bit abrupt here, but remember, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat and we'll have some time for them at the end. But with that, now we will move over to Professor Sandra Diaz. She was co-chair of the IPBES Global Assessment. And she's also an exceptionally accomplished ecologist, which is one of the most highly cited. And she is, in fact, considered to be one of the most influential scientists in the world. So with that, I think Alison mentioned that this is a pre-recorded talk, but Sandra is with us from Argentina, and she will be available for questions after the talk. So please start the talk.
I think Sandra.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Good afternoon. I feel truly honored by being part of the recipients of the 2020 Win-Win Sustainability Award. And personally, it's my privilege and pleasure to give this lecture on behalf of my co-chairs, Eduardo Brondisio and Joseph Setele, and also on behalf of all the authors of the IPBES Global Assessment team. Now, I will present my recorded talk, which is a tight synthesis of our findings after more than 3 years of interdisciplinary work. Thank you. It is my great honor and my pleasure to give this talk about the IPBES Global Assessment on behalf of my colleagues. As Anne Larigauderie mentioned, the IPBES Global Assessment is the product of the hard and generous work of hundreds of people. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of them, and very especially our heroic technical support unit. And I will start with our most fundamental message. And that message is nature. And the contributions it provides are fundamental to all people around the world. People, no matter who they are, no matter where they are sustained and inextricably interwoven with the fabric of life. We refer to this fabric of life simply as nature, all the way from the most pristine and remote forest to your garden. Nature provides materials for people's physical and cultural continuity, underpins all dimensions of human health, and support identities. Nature is the basis of our images and our stories. We are not truly ourselves without nature. And many of these contributions are not satisfactorily replaceable by human assets. Paradoxically, there is now incontestable evidence that nature and many of its present contributions to human quality of life and its capacity to continue providing such benefits in the future are deteriorating fast worldwide. It's true that more food and energy and raw materials than ever before are now being supplied to people across distant regions, but this comes at a price. Globally, since the 70s, out of 18 general categories of nature's contributions to people assessed by IPBES, 14 have declined. This means that these increases in production and the associated waste are undermining nature's capacity to regulate processes and regenerate itself, the capacity of nature to provide non-material contributions to people, and increasingly also erodes nature's ability to provide all contributions in the future, including material ones. And this decrease in nature's ability to provide benefits now and in the future is because the fabric of life itself is deteriorating fast, almost everywhere. The fabric of life is not only getting smaller, it's also getting increasingly thinner, simpler, more frayed, and more threadbare, all the way from biomes to genes. The great global environmental commons of land, ocean, atmosphere, and biosphere, upon which humanity as a whole depends, have been deeply reconfigured by people. And this is without considering the indirect impact through climate change. More species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction now than at any other time in human history. Of course, there have always been extinctions, but global extinction rates is now at least tens to hundreds of times higher than it has been on average over the last 10 million years. And these trends are not only affecting wild species. Globally, the number of crop and livestock varieties and land races are also decreasing fast. Look at how small is the proportion of domesticated diversity that we know is safe. Which takes me to another important innovation in the global assessment. We are very proud of having systematically incorporated indigenous and local knowledge and issues. Most of the domesticated diversity I just mentioned has been created and is now maintained by indigenous people and local communities. So they are the world's biggest stewards of agrobiodiversity. And not only that, they are major stewards of wild biodiversity as well. And yet, they face disproportionately serious threats. So in the global assessment, we have made an explicit effort to highlight these issues. Now, what are the causes behind all these trends in nature and its contributions to people? The main proximate causes, what we call the direct drivers of change, are the following. At the global level and in decreasing order of importance, first, land and sea use change, followed by direct exploitation of organisms, such as fishing, hunting, or selective logging, followed by climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. Human-driven climate change has not been the main driver so far, but increasingly exacerbates the impact of all other drivers, and it comes to be more and more important every year. These direct drivers are serious threats, but they are not the root causes of the crisis. An array of underlying causes, all ultimately rooted in social values, underpin how these direct drivers affect nature. We call these underlying causes the indirect drivers of change, and they include demographic, cultural, socioeconomic, technological, governance, and institutional factors. Indeed, the massive changes we see since the 70s are all related to these indirect drivers. Over the past 50 years, we have seen a fourfold increase in the global economy, a tenfold increase in global trade, and a similar increase in global per capita spending. Increasing demand for material goods and services is often satisfied by production in distant countries. The world has become a dramatically more interconnected place in terms of flows of information, goods, waste, and people. One might expect that this increasing connectivity has made it a better and fairer world. However, most of the increasing wealth and well-being and consumption has occurred in middle and especially high-income countries. things have not become much better than before in the least developed countries, despite their natural assets being extracted at unprecedented rate. Low and middle income countries accrue less GDP per unit of resource extracted than high income countries. This is because consumers and those who sell the goods and services are not paying for the true ecological and social costs. Most consumers, indeed, are not even aware of such costs. So you would probably not be too surprised if I tell you that most of the international goals for biodiversity and sustainability are far from being met. For example, only a few weeks ago, the Convention on Biological Diversity officially announced in a report heavily based in our global assessment that none of its 20 Aichi targets for 2020 has been fully achieved. So the global landscape is pretty bad. So what about the future? What can we expect? We assess a very wide range of scenarios, and future scenarios assuming business as usual technological development, population, consumption, and economic growth show that these trends continue in the future or get worse with time. Climate change is projected to become increasingly important, compounding the impact of all other drivers. And the trends are vastly different among different regions, exacerbating the inequalities we are already seeing today. So, is there any hope? Are any other options out there? The newest scenarios show that the future that is sustainable, compatible with nature, and equitable among people is indeed possible, but only if we implement transformative change. And if we start yesterday. What do we mean by transformative change? Quite simple. Transformative change is a dramatic change in the way we consume, buy, eat, dress, use energy, in the way we trade, and likely in the way we think. Basically, transformative change is about changing these indirect drivers. And how can we make it happen more specifically? We need more integrative, inclusive, informed, and adaptive governance. We need much better cross-sectorial planning. So, for example, the agricultural policy, the energy policy, and the transport policy synergize each other rather than cancel each other's positive effects. We need to build equity in the distribution of benefits from nature and burdens on nature among countries, among social actors within countries, and between generations. And here, incentives is a key word. Often, lack of financial resources is used as a reason for not gauging in enough change. But today, there are massive economic incentives and subsidies to sectors in agriculture, transport, fossil fuel, mining, fishing, infrastructure that are harmful to nature and people. All these subsidies and incentives could be reallocated towards more nature and people-friendly practices. And really important here is the fact that we have to start changing the social narratives, the stories that we keep telling each other and ourselves about what is a good life as individuals and as societies. These stories are not necessarily human nature. They can be changed, fostering visions of a good life that don't strongly rely on heavy material consumption and obsolescence, and instead nurture values of responsibility towards nature and the common good. An important point here is that, of course, we need better environmental policies and better policies for natural areas. But this alone is not going to make the difference. In addition, we need to mainstream nature, which means embedding nature considerations and safeguards in all sectors of the economy, in all links in the value chain, in the legislation, in education. The same way that human rights and gender equality and health are now increasingly considered, embedded in everything societies do, the same we need to do with nature. Another important point, especially in view of next year's summit meetings about climate and biodiversity, we need to understand that the challenges related to climate change, nature deterioration, and achieving a good quality of life for all are not separate. They are all interconnected because they are all underpinned by the earth fabric of life. Therefore, they need to be addressed synergistically in the context of regional differences. And in all this transformative change, we need to recognize the knowledge, practice, institutions, and values of indigenous peoples and local communities, not only the information they can give, basically involve them in an empowering and meaningful way in the construction of a new project for nature and societies. This all probably feels pretty overwhelming to you, and rightly so. It's going to be really hard. But we don't need to start completely from scratch. There are already many successful examples in many sectors, and they are good proofs of concepts. For example, there has been this recent article showing the success in making sure that between 25 and 50 species of birds and mammals didn't go over the cliff of extinction in the past 30 years. This is lovely, a reason for joy and optimism. But honestly, 50 species in 30 years is dwarfed by the rate of extinctions we are facing today. So we need to feel inspired, we need to learn from these successful examples, but we need to dramatically scale up and speed up. And in this very special occasion, I couldn't possibly finish without saying a couple of words about win-win. And these words are completely my own. So, what does win-win really mean? If win-win means that we will find a way in which we will all keep getting everything we want as much and as fast and as costly as we want it, and there will be enough for everyone in the world to do the same, then I'm sorry, I don't think this is going to happen. In a fairly close planet, where energy and matter are not really creating from nothing and all the discarded materials do not magically vanish, this narrative is incompatible with everything we know about physics, chemistry, and biology. Now, if instead win-win means that people and non-human nature have enough to thrive, and all people have enough, not just a few of them, then I think this can indeed work. But of course, in a finite, mostly closed world, this unavoidably means redistribution of benefits and burdens. So I think we can rise to the occasion, to the promise that we will all win in a fairer and more sustainable future for all life on Earth. But we all need to realize that it's going to take many of us beyond our comfort zones. So this kind of win-win is indeed worthwhile, but it's definitely going to go well beyond cosmetic change. You will have to go well beyond a better stewardship of your domestic compost heap. So, in conclusion, the IPBES Global Assessment is the most comprehensive picture of nature and people in recent times, and it shows trends that couldn't be clearer, more consistent, and more worrying. But this shouldn't be a reason for feeling depressed and paralyzed. Rather, it should be a call for action. We need to take action that goes much further and faster than ever before. We need to go for the immediate problems, but much more decisively, we need to go for the root causes. And ultimately, we need to realize at a deep level that nature is not just for the environmentalists, it's not just for the ecologists. Nature concerns every one of us, and it's a battle we cannot lose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sandra, for that talk. And I'd like to remind everyone that while the talk was pre-recorded, Sandra is with us right now, so she is on hand to answer some questions. We're aware that we're running a little bit behind time, but we would like to take a few moments for questions nonetheless, and we'll finish just a little bit past the hour. So we see some questions coming in on Facebook right now, and I'd like to read one here from Henrik Brundin, who's the director at Swedbio. And he says, thank you for two super clear presentations. In order to address the indirect drivers, we, as stated, absolutely need to address equity. IPLCs, that's indigenous people and local communities, knowledge, and especially human rights. Would you care to comment or give your thoughts on the possibility of including a clear human rights-based approach, including mainstreaming human rights, in targets and indicators in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Plan? And that question, sorry. And I think that either of you could actually answer that question. Perhaps Anne might be more suitable.
Do we have Anne?
Down there. Oh. Yes.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't touch anything. So about bringing in human rights into the next series of goals for the post-2020 framework. I'm assuming that is the question. It's really not up to me to comment on that. Of course, that would be important, and Perhaps Sandra can comment a little bit on whether there is, what the global assessment said about that, but she certainly has commented a lot on the need for a more equal society, and that certainly is part of that, and so that would certainly be very important to include that component for sure.
Great, thank you, Anne. Sandra, do you have any thoughts to add to that? Sandra there?
Yes, thank you. Well, I agree with Anne that it's not up to us to tell the CBD what to do. From the knowledge point of view, I've seen a number of papers, initiatives, and projects in which the right to nature, the right for a meaningful everyday access to nature in a meaningful way is increasingly being embedded in the rights consideration. There are some seminal papers by the UN special reports on human rights to nature that go in that direction. So in summary, from the knowledge point of view, there's a lot of thinking in trying to make our link with the rest of nature much more explicitly embedded in what is meant basic human rights.
All right, thank you, Sandra. I'm looking through, there's a number of questions coming in right now. Actually, I'll go back to one of the first questions that we had and read it perhaps alongside a second one that we have here. So this, I think, may be a good one for Sandra, and it's from Jose asking, how would it be best to expose city dwellers more to nature? So how do we get the city population more connected to nature? And then along that same lines, we have Leo, who has asked, would you consider it to be more important to engage at a local, in local improvement efforts rather than on the global scale, and same as an individual? So this is a lot of questions about scale-dependent action.
Okay, they are different. I'll start with them, and I'm sure Anne will like to comment. In terms of increasing the engagement of city dwellers with nature, I think a good city planning, a fair city planning that makes sure there's plenty of access to urban green spaces for everyone. So the cities, A, have enough green spaces, and B, those are access to everyone. Something that you may not have very minor problems in Europe, but in the South America, for example, is a huge problem that the green space is there, but only a chosen few can access to that. So that's a direct way of making sure that people get much more in contact on every day while walking to school, while going to work, while sitting on their balcony with nature. In terms of the scale, I think I would say no. Engaging only in the local scale is not going to be enough, unfortunately, in my personal view. I think working at the very local scale is incredibly important. But just on the basis of personal sacrifice in your own garden is not going to be enough. I think it's important to engage in larger battles through electing the right people, through working for the right laws, making sure regulations are enforced, to pushing your government for signing the right treaties. All those things that are larger and require a lot of people working together, I think they are essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Anne, would you like to add some comments there? You're nodding at me.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. And so I will not come back to what Sandra said about making more space to nature in cities and providing access to everyone. That's really key. Perhaps one additional component is for cities to reduce their impact on biodiversity. That's really important. And that is also through city planning. Urban sprawl is a key driver of biodiversity to those through land use change. And so it's important that cities really try to densify, but in a smart way. So more compact cities that also reduces fossil fuels because of less need for transportation. Cities also need to work. Everything that cities do that reduce fossil fuel use is win-win. Win-win-win even, because that also helps with the health of the citizens, so low impact transformation system, and also connection between all of these various green spaces within cities is also an important component as well.
All right, thank you. There's a number of comments still on the stream, but I think we're getting out of time here. And there's quite a few that are thanking both of you for really, really nice presentations. So I'll pass that along since I know you're not looking at it right now. It seems to be very much appreciated.
Yes, so unfortunately time is up. Before we close, we would like to present you both with honorary memberships to the GGBC. And we will be sending them to you together with a small gift for your participation. And we want you to be honorary members, not only because you have participated in this event, but also for your lifelong contribution to biodiversity, which is really, really impressive. And so I would like to thank you both very, very much. And thank you to all the listeners.
Yes. And a few final words. We hope that everyone has enjoyed the lecture. We're happy to see so many people that have been joining us. We'll have a recorded version available in the near future on our website, hopefully with subtitles as well. And until then, you can follow the GGBC on Twitter at GGBC_GU, and IPBES at IPBES or at IPBES. For ongoing updates on local and global biodiversity research and issues. And the IPBES Twitter account especially has some very, very well thought out, very short posts about the most important things you need to know about biodiversity. So I strongly recommend that account. And finally, you can join us online tomorrow for the Win-Win Gothenburg Sustainability Award Prize Ceremony, which will be going on at 5:30 in the evening, Swedish time. And we'll post a link for that below shortly. It will be available streamed online as well. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much again to both Sandra and Anne for your lectures, and to Win-Win for the collaboration this year. And I'd like to also say a huge thank you to Helene Aronsson and Eric Selgren, who have been here behind the scenes doing a lot of the hard work, making sure that everything is going. Helene has also done the vast majority of the planning for this event. So without her, we wouldn't have all been sitting here today. Thank you, Helene. We would also like to thank, of course, all of the GGBC members for making the GGBC what it is. It is a member-driven organization, so that is our real power. And thank you so much for everyone who has tuned in today to learn a little bit more about biodiversity and what IPBES has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.